Maybe there's some presets already in there as well. Okay, so value just says like lucky number 13. All right, so we see Will Steinberg come with a layout editor. Let me know what you mean by layout editor. This is from Yazian. So let me know if it's like a keyboard layout or what do you mean by a layout editor, just to make sure I understand. By a layout editor, just to make sure I understand. By a layout.
Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I am not joined this morning by my co-host, attorney Sonia Madison, because we are both, she is out today. And for right now, you at least have me flying solo, and we are delighted to have a guest this morning on with us, and I'm sure you'll enjoy her content and her conversation. Perhaps you'll even be challenged by it. But as we always do on a weekly basis, we start the show out with just a small recap of what's been going on in our world today. And today you only get my perspective since Sonia is not joining us. But as many of you know, that our former President Donald Trump has now been indicted in Fulton County, Georgia, I think there were like 41 counts or something like that. But a lot of it involved conspiracy to overturn an election in Georgia. It's interesting to me that it's not so interesting. It's certainly not surprising that a lot of people are looking at this and viewing it more as a political hit job, as Trump wants them to believe it is. And so you've got some of his supporters, staunch supporters, are still saying that this is a political hit job. I'm surprised that Senator Tim Scott, is still pushing this narrative as well. He's climbing in the polls, as many people are seeing in Iowa. He is putting forth a much more positive message as it relates to the other Republicans in the primary race. But he still continues to say that these things are politically motivated and sowing greater distrust in our justice system. And that's the part that I think that bothers me most, is that, yes, our justice system is biased. You know, when you have prosecutorial discretion, that means that whether or not someone gets prosecuted is at the judgment of the assigned prosecutor, whether it be a district attorney or whether it be local or attorney general or someone who's been granted that authority to determine, after looking at all the evidence, whether there's sufficient cause to bring a case before a grand jury. And so when they bring it before a grand jury, as happened in every single one of his indictments, which are now like 91, I believe, charges that he's indicted on, that prosecutor has the discretion as to whether or not to pursue it. And he or she will make that determination based off of the evidence and whether they believe that there's sufficient evidence to bring about a conviction. And it's not just left in that prosecutor's discretion, but it's also then left in the grand jury. A grand jury who hears, albeit one side, they hear one-sided evidence, and they determine based off of what's presented before them whether there's probable cause to believe that a crime was committed. And that's all an indictment is. An indictment is not a conviction. It's not saying that, yes, you did something. They're saying that there's sufficient evidence to suggest that a crime had been committed. And I'm concerned because a lot of political personalities, a lot of politicians, for their own benefit and for their own sake and self-preservation, are now pointing out what the system has been doing all along. And that is to say, yes, you can indict a ham sandwich. A prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. Basically, But I think that's how the adage goes. But the point is, it's one-sided. Yes, it's one-sided. It's always been one-sided until you get to the court. But now they're pointing these things out, pointing out the obvious and what has always existed, and making it seem like it's a political hit job. It's not a political hit job. It's the way that the system is set up. The prosecutor gets to present its evidence. First of all, before it even brought before a grand jury. And once it's accumulated all that evidence, it presents it to a grand jury, and the grand jury does not get the chance to hear the defendant's side of anything. And if the defendant is brought in, and Sonia, if you're listening, if you're tuned in, and if I say something incorrect, you can always correct me through the chat as well. But and if one of the defendants are brought in and allowed to testify and give their thoughts, they're not allowed to have their attorney with them. So they're not trying to set up a trial in this case. A grand jury is not a trial. They're not jurors as in a trial. A trial involves the prosecution presenting its evidence and the defense then being able to offer their explanation of those events. But my bigger concern is that if you really think that this is a political hit job, why don't you wait until all of the evidence comes out? Why don't you say that this is the judicial system that we've operated in for the past 200 plus years, and we need to let the legal process run its course, because this is what we do. This is how we function. This is how we maintain law and order in this society. You don't like it? Trust me, as a black man, we've been on, our entire race has been on the other side of that. Don't like the fact that prosecutors can accumulate any number of evidence that they want, and you never have a chance to defend yourself until your day in court. That's why they call it having your day in court. And so, but unfortunately, what they would like to happen is to prosecute this, or at least try this case in the court of public opinion, because they believe that you as the public are too gullible and are too dumb to recognize that what will happen is that he'll have a chance to bring out all the evidence that is legitimate, because in the court of law, you can't bring illegitimate evidence before. It has to be sworn testimony. It is something that you attest to be truthful under penalty of perjury. So you bring in some of the conjecture and some of the falsehoods and conspiracy theories that you bring on social media, which is done day after day. You bring that in the court. When you're sworn to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, you face the risk of penalty. In the court of public opinion on social media, truth, whatever they call that, the Truth Network, whatever his tweeting thing is, Twitter or X, if that's what it's called now, Facebook, social media, all these social media sources, you can say whatever you choose to say. But until it is backed up by sworn testimony, and until it is under penalty of perjury, it's all conjecture. And so what will happen, and we've seen that that's what happened even when the Trump campaign contested the election. They said a whole lot of things publicly that they couldn't say before the courts. One of them in particular, I think one of his attorneys contested, I think in Arizona, publicly, they said the Republicans weren't even allowed to be present during the counting. But when they came before the courts, the judge asked them specifically, are you saying that there were no Republicans permitted in that room when the things were counting it? And, he got backed into a hole where he said, well, there was a non-zero number of people there. Non-zero number of people. This is what you do. And he knew he couldn't purport that same lie in front of the court. Otherwise, his entire license would have been in jeopardy. So he had to come up with some other escape. Some non-zero number of Republicans were present, which means that Republicans were present there, and that the claim you made on social media was untruthful, and you couldn't bring that in court. There are some things that over the past week, there was some evidence and some emails that Donald Trump actually he received some things from John Eastman, and who was the attorney who actually, I think, orchestrated a lot of this stuff. He said, you can't make these claims in court, though. You can make these claims in public, but you can't make them in court because they're not truthful. But Donald Trump actually went on ahead and filed some papers that actually had that in there. So we'll see how all this things comes out in the wash. It's fascinating to me. I don't need the NFL or I don't need NBA because this is my NFL. Watching the political gamemanship. The only downside about this is that people's lives are impacted by it, by the decisions that these politicians make, and I think they need to recognize that they have more power of influence, and that it should not be, haphazardly wielded. But such is our system. We will see what happens with these four indictments, or these four cases, criminal cases that have now been brought against Donald Trump. They will soon come to trial. I think the district attorney in Georgia is now asking for a March 4th deadline, and all of these things are, it's a really tight deadline for him to have to undergo the criminal court cases, the January 6th, the Georgia thing. He's got the Stormy Daniels trial coming up. He also has some other stuff with the, I think with his the Trump organization. So there are all types of court cases that are now pending that he'll have to coordinate the schedules on those. And it'd be interesting to see what happens. I do personally believe that the American people should be able to hear the information that is presented under oath before the election comes. And so I'm hopeful that the judges will have that same sentiment and make sure that at least one of these federal courses, one of these voting election fraud and conspiracy cases will come to fore before the election, even before the primary. I think primary voters need to even know about what's going to happen and what information is presented by the prosecution, and then also what the defense's sworn rebuttal is, not necessarily their online social media rebuttal. Don't fall for the hype, folks. Don't fall for the hypes one way or the other, because both sides are actually going to give you what they want you to believe. And don't be so gullible to immediately jump on board and believing that everything that is being presented to you is truthful, because it isn't. So enough of that, but I did want to make sure that we briefly touched on that this morning. But we're excited today to have on the show a special guest. She is a mother and a mentor of two mid-20s. She's a co-author of a book, a workbook for men and women based on David Dita's The Way of a Superior Man. She's a wife of a retired Army officer and civilian senior DBA, and retired middle school teacher of 17 years with a doctorate of education in curriculum and instruction. As a teacher in the community and a community mom, the struggles of young adults stumbling to find footing have weighed heavy on Dr. Angela Carswell's heart. And as a result, she became an avid reader of self-help books, mindfulness techniques, and self-help research. Now she is pursuing her passion for nurturing and supporting families by authoring books. And one is the title of our show today. It's called The Top Shelf Wife. Welcome to the Roundtable Consult, Dr. Angela Carswell.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
Well, good to have you on the show. Before we delve into your book and even some of the concepts of the book, I want to have our viewers know a little bit about who you are. What is your story? Who is Dr. Angela Carswell? Or Dr. Can we call you Dr. Ann?
Yeah, you can call me a lot of things. So you can call me Angela. You really don't. You can drop that doctor if you like. I'm not a person that gets hung up on that. So whatever comes naturally, it's fine.
Good. So what's your story?
My story is that I was married at a young age, 23. And as a person in love at 23, I don't know that I ever had conversations about dating and how to choose people and how to be married or any of those things. So got married, 2 kids. And after 15 years, I got divorced. And so during that time, I kind of had to I didn't have to be, I chose to be introspective, and I chose to really try and get down to the meat of what may have possibly happened, and what maybe should have been happening, things that I didn't know, things that I hadn't thought about. So it was just a good time for reflection, and then getting in the groove of, okay, well, how does marriage work, and how do people find each other, and how in those, at the time, those Atlanta streets, those Atlanta dating streets, they not easy. So, so it was a journey. Like, it was literally a journey of just really trying to understand what is intimacy, and what is from different perspectives. How does it work, and how do you do yourself justice in that dating process? So so that led me to want to write eventually, having conversations with my children, who are great people, but weren't finding success in the dating life. And if it's important to me to be a mentor and to kind of walk with my children as they walk through life, I had to address that, because it was kind of messing with their self-esteem. It was messing with their kind of ability to show up and be seen. So I kind of took that on. It wasn't just well, you'll figure it out and pray about it, or just, you're young, don't worry about it, it'll come when it's ready. Like, all those things that the adults of us know, when we kind of just pithy comments to say. So I really kind of invested in what they were doing for themselves and for me. Conversations with friends and family really kind of led me to this path of saying, like, what are we not doing? Because family is important. And and I know you know that, because I know the history of you and Sonia, even though she's not here. You've been in families that are 2-parent families until death do us part, and that's very, very rare.
Mhm.
I know several people that just have been in 3 or 4 generations of single moms or divorced families. And so
Mhm.
we have to kind of get to the bottom of that. And that's kind of what I'm on the journey of now.
Well, good. And even in that brief introduction, you said so many things that I really want to make sure we get to talk
Sorry.
to. No, that's quite all right. I mean, it's just this is where the show goes, and
Okay.
so it gives us an opportunity to delve into something that we may or may not necessarily have planned to delve into. And I'm so anxious to get into that, but I'm gonna hold back for a little bit, because there's a couple of other things that I wanted to ask regarding this pursuit that you've had. So you have your doctorate in curriculum and education, is that correct?
Yes, instruction. It's the education
And
doctorate.
so then, just for our listeners, what then makes you then an expert on this topic of relationships and health, self-help? Is that just something that's been ordained and appointed to you, or what makes you feel qualified to be able to write this? It's a school of hard knocks, sir.
Well, I knew enough not to rely on my own strength.
Hmm.
So the background in education kind of gave me some help in figuring that, I need to research this, and I need to provide some good references for why I think what I'm recommending, and how one should move. So a lot of this book isn't based on me and what I think. Although I do have some thoughts. I am an opinion-based person. So But I was very cognizant of finding references, whether it starts out with an entire chapter with biblical references of what does God require of a wife? What does he say about being a wife? What are the things that if you want to use that for a reference, what does that say? And people tend to rely on, well, I'm a Proverbs 31 woman, and that's fine, and that's great. But what is that? What are the tasks and what are the things, and how do you do those things in a daily walk? Because we don't live in that type of space where it's easy for people to really verbalize like how they work on themselves. There's some references from neuroscientists. There's some references from just all types. There's Deepak Chopra, very heavy in meditation. There's a rabbi that I reference. And so I wanted to not just be an expert, but I wanted to be a researcher first and foremost. And so I hope that I've done that along the journey of reading the book. There's a lot of science behind some of the comments that I make. Yeah.
So I noticed that you take some references from the Bible, also from the Quran, and as you mentioned, you quote some Jewish rabbis in there. But it seems like most of the focus has more of a spiritual. Maybe if I can just call it a spiritual connotation and a spiritual recommendation or reference of how a wife should be. Would that be a fair representation, or
that's fair?
Okay,
that's fair. It starts with that foundationally, and I think once you reckon with that foundationally, then you can say, okay, I'm on this spiritual journey, and how is that going to affect me? How is it going to affect a husband? How is it going to affect a family? How is it going to affect the community? And so looking inward first and foremost, I think is the foundation for many of the journeys that we make in life. When you choose a career, when you choose a spouse, when you choose even where the area that you want to live in, is it peaceful? Is it calming? Is it giving you? Is it feeding you? And a lot of times we tend to look outwardly. So it is a journey that starts inwardly. And so I wanted to capture that too.
Nice. So I've had this conversation more times than I'd actually want to have with younger women who today say, I don't want to get married. In my generation, and as we were growing up, most of the women, the early 20s, that was the expectation. You go to school, you go to college, you get out of college, and then you got married. You got married at 23. I got married at age 23. It was an expectation. Now I have a 29-year-old son. Well, I guess he's been married for 2 years. He's probably gotten married early. Because I'm like 27. Wow. Now people are looking at that in just a generation. They're like, but they're wondering like, why you get married so young? 27 is young now to get married. We see people into their 30s and so finally first getting married. And a lot of women who are saying, hey, I don't think I want to get married. And I found myself challenged with answering the question to people who don't necessarily subscribe to my religion, to my faith, or who don't have any spiritual foundation. Answering the question, why should I get married? Do you have an answer for those people?
I think I do. Let's see what we can come up with. I think it's first of all, there has been a difference generationally. And I recall having conversations with Sheridan and I believe a friend of hers. I think it was 3 of us at the time having a conversation. And it just came out that we just really didn't do a good job of being married. And so we didn't show by our lives that this was a good institution. And although the book in general has some Christian and spiritual foundation, once it goes from that, it goes into teaching and practice. So it's not all the way through. So if it's not something that you subscribe to, then there's definitely things for you in the text. But being married, we didn't show that through infidelity, through the court system, through the high divorce rates, through traumatic childhoods in homes that were two-parent homes. We didn't show that marriage was a good institution. And so I can understand why people ask and people are afraid or people are shying away from marriage. But when you look at successful people, they have a core group that they can point to specifically for their growth and for their for challenging them and supporting them. And there's no better that I know of, there's no better person to challenge and support as a husband or wife. Like for me, people grow the most through marriage because you have somebody accountable with you every step of the way. You have somebody who hopefully shows an invested interest in you. You have someone who is checking you on your integrity along the journey. So that's one thing. When you look at millionaires and as they made it to their millionaire status, many, if not all, had a spouse. And that I think is important. You also have, it's financially a good reason to choose well in marriage. Now, if you out there looking for big booty Judy and big butt Gus, you may not end up with a good choice for a husband or wife. But, people go around it in different ways because I think they don't know. And they aren't conversations that we're having or haven't been having. So just the ability to grow, the ability to prosper, I think is doubled through a marriage.
So the argument that other people who are not proponents of marriage will say, well, I can get all of that with a companion, someone who I live with and who I have this lifelong commitment to. What does the title or the covenant of marriage actually then bring to the relationship that otherwise communal relationship wouldn't?
Well, if you're talking, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a person who is a believer and you're talking to a religious person, then normally the argument might be made that it's a covenant, like you're within the covenant of God through marriage. If you're not talking to a believer or someone who is less spiritual, there are legal reasons that it's a good idea. And in pop culture, from time to time, you see people who die and they don't have, or even if depending on your family dynamics, you see people who are living in a house for 20 years, one of them dies, and the girlfriend has no claim to anything. By the end of the day, she has her bags and she's leaving. And so when you look at that perspective, if we just for the sake of argument, we got together at 40, he passes at 60, I have no legal claim to anything. At 60, I have to find a place to live. I have to find some sustainability. And that's unfortunate. And so I think just for, base legal reasons is a good, I think, for me. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've been challenged with it because I said it's hard for me to come up with a reason other than legal. But I do think that on a very ethereal level or intangible level, there is some affirmation that is provided by making it legal. There is Beyonce say, if you really want it, better put a ring on it. Got to put a ring on it, and that's something that we don't take. I mean, that we sort of like face in a cavalier way, but the truth of the matter is, it's true. I think it does add another level of commitment to an affirmation to the validity of the relationship, even if it is just simply a legal documentation. I think you start looking at people a little bit different when you realize that this person is willing to commit legally to me. And I just think that it adds something else to it. When I was engaged with my wife, we had a long engagement period. And one of the reasons why we were engaged so long, and it was against the advice of our church, and I'm glad that our church suggested that we be engaged for no longer than 6 months because of the temptation for premarital sex. And, but we had known each other for so many years before then. And we knew each other as boyfriend and girlfriend. We knew each other as friend. We knew each other. But then during that year and a half that we were engaged, we started looking at each other a little bit differently, I think. I had to start seeing this person as my wife. And I know you mentioned in your book, you talk about this helpmeet piece. And I really want to get into talking about some of that helpmeet, because you're actually talking in your book. There was a quote in there that I actually wanted to make sure that I read, because I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to pick your brain on that, what you were thinking about when you wrote that. It says that a helpmeet is a woman of value who assertively contributes to her husband's purpose. Okay, just leave that out there right there. And so maybe because I can imagine that when you get feedback from some of these women, they'll be like, why does it have to be all about my husband's purpose? And why is my identity now defined by my ability to help advance my husband's purpose? Maybe you can answer that for us.
Sure. Before the book was published, I had a read group. And so that the idea of that is very abrasive and triggering to a lot of people.
I can imagine it would be.
It
wasn't to me. It wasn't to me, frankly. But listen, well, I think wives are great. Before you said, I think wives are great things. I advocate that everybody has a wife. I would even tell my wife to have a wife, except for the fact that I think she would like her better than me, because wives are wonderful, wonderful. I don't know how much husbands contribute to things, but I think when you do get a top shelf wife, that's, it's something to behold and something to be had as well. The Bible says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing, and I agree with him. So,
well, true. But when you're talking about, finding a wife and finding a husband, if I'm bringing this value to you, and I make it my business to make you happy and to really buy into your purpose. If you're a provider type of man, am I helping you or am I helping me? I'm helping both of you, both of us. Mm-hmm. I may feed into you, and I remember on some social media platform, there was a conversation about you're stranded on an island. It's, the husband, the mom, and the child, and there's a limited amount of food. Who should eat? And a lot of people were like, I'm gonna feed the baby need to eat, and this and that and the third. And the idea and the concept, that was behind the post was the fact that if you feed the man, he will go out with the stamina to provide. He will go fishing, he will hunt, he will forage, he will do what needs to be done in order to support the family. And we all will eat. And so in that vein, I never, I would never presume to think that women aren't important. They don't have plans. They don't have goals. Never. Like, I'm sitting here as a doctorate. I'm sitting here with both a son and daughter. So I've got skin in the game. But the more that I believe in your purpose, I can respect you as a man. And I can respect the way that you provide for us. There's so many situations where people get married and maybe haven't had the conversation, or his purpose changes or what have you. And it ends up triggering a woman to feel that, I can't support this. Like, I can't, he's lazy. He's not doing what he's supposed to do, this, that, and the third. And from once that becomes ingrained and is an infestation in the relationship, even if it's just mental, that changes the dynamic of the relationship. There's a scientific term called hypergamy. Have you heard of it?
Hypergamy?
Hypergamy.
What is that? Multiple wives or something like that?
Lord help us. No.
Oh, that's polygamy. I'm
That's
sorry.
polygamy.
Oh my gosh. Don't get me excited here.
Where is your wife? If there's an object that comes from off screen and hits you, just don't be surprised. Do not be surprised.
Listen, I'm not happy with one wife, but the one wife keeps me very happy. But like I said, I'm a big proponent of wives. But go ahead with this hypergamy.
You did say that. We were forewarned.
Yes, hypergamy. The action of marrying or forming a sexual relationship with a person of a superior social something. Somebody help me out.
Sociological.
Sociological. I missed the whole chat though. Sociological or educational background. So it's
Look, you get yourself together. You just giggling over there at the prospect of multiple wives. Is the show about to go downhill from here?
And downhill from here. I'm about to go downhill from here. But no. But how does that factor into your recommendations?
Well,
in your advice,
if you have a man with purpose and you respect his purpose, the Bible says that from a spiritual, biblical perspective, wives are asked and told, admonished to respect their husbands.
Mm-hmm.
And if a man is about his purpose and you respect that purpose, then that just bodes well for you being able to respect him and the decisions that he's making to provide and to be present in the home. But from a more scientific standpoint, this particular idea means that basically a woman has to look up to her man in some form or facet. In the definition that you gave, it's sociological. So a man who has a greater social standing. He may have the car, he may have the job, he may have whatever it is that she respects, he needs to have. And that keeps a level of balance. And not to say that she doesn't have her own standing, but women gravitate towards strong men. And in this society, in this culture, that can mean social, economic, educational, or whatever. So
are you suggesting then a woman should never marry down? Because, I mean, obviously, there are some very well-educated women, yourself having a doctorate, and there are many female physicians and attorneys who have high-powered careers, and they engage into relationships with men who sometimes can or cannot necessarily handle that level of power. Should it always be that dynamic where the woman is marrying up, for lack of a better expression?
Well, there is a lack of a better expression, but I do feel like people should know exactly the value of what they're bringing to their relationship. Now, society would say marrying down. Okay.
Or hypogamy.
Now it may be
hypogamy.
Hypergamy.
Oh, hypogamy would be marrying down then, right?
Oh, okay. Well, no, yes. We're not. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So there has to be something. Like, I believe in, and I think relationships work best when people really understand what the other person brings. And so if maybe she is a doctor, she is this, she is that, she's all things wonderful. And when she's looking for a man, maybe she doesn't want somebody on the same level, because we have to have kids and somebody has to, and it's important for me that somebody have the time and not so much the career engagement. Maybe, maybe he's well read, maybe he's well traveled, maybe he interacts with people on a much more on an easier plane. So I think whatever, I hate to say marrying down, but he needs to have a benefit, a direct and definitive benefit to her. And I think that goes both ways. But he definitely needs to have a benefit to her. He needs to solve some problem for her. And I believe in the way of the superior man. That's one of the things that David Didas talks about in maintaining the balance of a relationship. There's so many things that women bring to, just in the way that traditional marriages are set up. They bring a lot. They're normally the caretakers. They normally have a greater sense of organization. They a lot of times bring the softest to set the tone for the household. So the man has to have something that he's bringing to the table, some sort of stability that is beneficial, possibly something that she isn't finding in her other high-powered male counterparts.
So one of our guests is asking the question: Is it always just financial that the man can bring to the table, or are there other areas? What happens if the man is the more nurturing of the two, and just I'm taking care of the house, I'm a little bit more apt at, because there are a lot of women who aren't very nurturing, especially now, especially some of the ones that you see who are getting these high powered positions, and they find themselves sometimes married to a man who's much more docile, subservient, if you want to use those words, or and more nurturing and caring, and probably better suited to rear children than the woman.
It's difficult to say, because it depends on, people end up in marriages of all sorts. You have to be cognizant of all of those components while you're dating. You have to know what they're bringing. And it may not always be financial, but we live in it requires finance there's several sayings about finance and romance. And that's for a reason, because we live in a place where we need it. So is it always? I wouldn't say it always has to be. But I do think that once a woman starts carrying that, once she takes on the responsibility load for that, it moves more into the area of, we're in a partnership and this is working this way. As opposed to some relationships are more of a leadership. Men take a more leadership role as being the provider, being the protector, being present in a lot of ways. And normally that's the typical traditional way that men provide and how they show up in a marriage. If you're not going to do that, then as a woman, you just need to know that your shoulders need to be broad. And that depiction is normally given to men. Because, and me as a teacher for 17 or so years, and then other demanding jobs, if you decide that you're going to take on the financial load for the household as a wife, you can't get tired. And I think our bodies, our physiology supports the fact that women deal with short-term physical pain better. We endure childbirth. It's a short amount of time. But when you're talking about running a marathon and the sustainability for carrying the financial load, I think men are better suited just because of those broad shoulders.
Well, one of our viewers says that if a man is not providing the finances, he's frowned upon. And, and I think from a traditional standpoint, that seems to be true. But unfortunately, I see far too often these days where it's the women who's doing it. And I see it much more in our Black community where women are taking care of men financially. And the man can't put together a table at home, a desk or anything like that. Women are the ones who are bringing home the bacon, and when they get home, they cook, they take care of the kids, do the homework with the kid. And what is this man doing? And unfortunately, I see that happening far too often. When I see it happen that often, I start to wonder whether or not it's just the woman who really likes to be in control and likes to have a man who is perhaps of a lower status than she is so that she can control him.
I mean, there's a whole lot of choices that have to be made, and you have to be aware that this is a choice, and I'm making it when I choose this man or this woman. And we have, through society over the last however many years, whether it's the feminist movement or the incarceration rates for men, there's been an imbalance, whatever the reason is. And so we have, I feel, and I think the data supports that we have now, what you're saying is that women are carrying a much heavier load. And so how do we bring that back into balance? And I think men definitely have to do have their own mentorship. And if along my journey I find a man who's willing to write the top shelf husband, I will definitely embrace him.
Well, the topic has been written already. It's just under different titles, called When a Man Worships by Dr. Mark Williams. But
okay.
Available on Amazon.
Right. Okay. Shameless plug, no problem.
Yeah.
So, men have to address manhood and becoming a man. And that's, for me, we address that with my son a couple, probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe. That he was going through a lot. And so that's what kind of led us to creating the workbooks for men and women based on David Dita, The Way of the Superior Man. Mm-hmm. And so men have to, mentor each other and form the coalition that they need in order to help men find their footing in walking on the edge, taking challenges that are risk averse and really stepping up into these roles. And also women, to be able to connect, women have to be able to talk to men's hearts and talk to them in a way. And I just mean that talk to doesn't necessarily mean talk, but you have to learn how to interact as a person who is helpful to a man without being resentful, being an active listener. And this is all in the Support a Husband chapter. Being an active listener. If you reflect on your journey with your wife and your career, how often did she say, like, Mark, that's just a stupid idea?
How often did I listen?
About your career now, not about what you do around the house. But but being an active listener, like really learning what that means as a woman, being accepting. There's two different types of being accepting as a wife. When you're dating, you don't have to accept everything. You have some choices to say, hey, this is not what I'm signing up for. I see you. I'm trying to experience you, but I don't, I'm not swayed by you. Like I can't get on the program that you're talking about. But in a marriage, you have a different level of acceptance. You kind of have to accept that, this is how he's providing for me, and this is how he's showing up. And you can buck against it and you can grab the reins yourself, but just know that when you do that, um, unless you find a way to make it, it's your idea and it's my idea, and we're doing this together.
Mhm.
Unless you can get him to accept leadership for it, you're accepting who he is and what
Yeah.
he's there for.
Well, we had another viewer who says men do this because slack because women aren't holding them accountable. And so my question is then how does a woman hold that man accountable to being the provider that she desires after the marriage? Again, it's a lot of work that
And
you
that's
can
the
put.
thing.
That's a lot of work that you can put on the front end and say, okay, I'm out of here if you're not going to meet up to this standard. But then after you've said that I do, how do you hold that man accountable? Or do you just accept, well, this is just the way that he provides for me, and that's how he's coming to the table, and there's nothing that can be changed about that? How can you as a top shelf woman hold your husband accountable to help him grow? Because you said marriage is supposed to be a tremendous institution that allows us to grow. How do you help me grow then as a wife in that case?
I think learning how to speak, speak, hopefully when you were dating, there's a lot of work that goes in on the front end. And, I'm now in a position to kind of be witnessing my daughter date. And so, there's a lot of work that goes in on the front end. Do you see him leading while you're dating? Are you looking at his decisions financially while you're dating? Are you having conversations about budget while you're dating? Are you seeing him as an emotional leader while you're dating? Or is he just there to go on, to pay for dates or whatever? And so when you decide to marry, you move into a different place. And so you have to work on your feminine voice. I was talking to my cousin recently, who's a ordained minister. And, one of the things that he really valued about his wife through the course of their probably 18, maybe 20 years of marriage is that she understands his heart. She is trying to understand his conflicts that he's going through as far as himself and his growth. And she's patiently talking to him through the fire. And I think if we can become that inner ear of our husbands, then I think we stand a better chance of him saying, you know what, I hear you. I hear you. And I know that you're here in this struggle with me. Now, if we're just punching down or saying you ain't doing this and you ain't doing that, and I'm not happy, that's a different conversation. And I don't think men are likely to hear that, as well as they're able to hear patience, a feminine voice, somebody being it with them.
So I hear you saying that they should learn how to be a little manipulative then, because
You
I need
know,
I need to present this to you in a way that I know you will receive it, that eventually I'll benefit from.
and I'm okay with that. I mean, I think we have a tendency to say manipulation is bad, but I don't
I know.
think so all the
I'm with you.
time.
I'm with you on that 100%. I'm with you on it 100%.
And I think it goes back to like being able to learn how to trust your spouse. And and when people get married, they're not fully aware of how much they will trust and depend on their spouse if they're doing it well. And so, Philip knows I'm manipulating him sometimes. He knows, just like your wife is manipulating you. And you go along with it. Why? Why do you go along with it?
Because it feels good.
It feels good. And she's right.
Okay. For that moment.
She wouldn't tell you something that she didn't believe was for the benefit of the family.
So what is the benefit for the woman who goes through, who does all this inward self work and has herself presented as a top shelf wife? What's the benefit to her when she's making all this effort to go to build her husband, help him pursue his purpose? And it seems like he's consuming and consuming and consuming and maybe never returning. What's the benefit to the woman?
Well, again, have you chosen, it's easy to it's easy to ask the devil's advocate questions. Well, what happens in the worst case scenario?
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. But again, if you didn't choose these things on the front end, you weren't looking for a husband that showed that he was a leader. He was in a fraternity. He got his friends together on a regular basis. He communicated with other men who were married. You didn't look for any of these things up front, but now in the back end, all these things become important. And that's, I think, the beauty of me, I hope, writing the book, is that there's a lot of things that we need to begin to look for up front. And if you aren't looking inwardly up front to have these observations with people that you're dating, it is highly likely that you end up, it could happen either way, but it is more likely that you could end up with somebody who doesn't listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
Or who doesn't have these plans that you can respect and
you
buy
just
into.
Scrap it all and then start over again, learn the lesson better next time?
You can have the patience, you can have the patience, you can, speak within him, you can develop a program and a plan, and hopefully he can get on board and maybe begin to lead, maybe begin to take over the lead at some point. There's a number of things that could happen.
Well, this conversation certainly has gone quickly and our time has almost run out. But one of the things that you mentioned in your introduction, two things I want to ask you. And in these last couple of minutes that we have, first of all, what is a top shelf wife? And then you also mentioned some word, you said successful dating. I want to know what your definition of those two things are.
Okay. I think a top shelf wife is somebody who wants to contribute to themselves, and then a husband, a successful family that is nurturing and supportive along the way, who wants to make an impact within her sphere, whatever her sphere of impact can be. She's aware of that, and she is working towards it. She's not shying away from it. She's not spending time blaming other people. She is aware of her choices. And, for me, I think that's the ultimate slap of feminism, is that I'm choosing to walk in my femininity and impact these lives, my life and the lives of those around me. And successful dating is, I think, a very experience-based practice where you are learning yourself. You're learning what your boundaries are, not just by saying, well, I ain't gonna put up with this, that, and the third, or you gotta have 6 figures and this and that. It's about learning what I bring to the table. And it's normally, for me, as a more traditional person, what I bring to the table isn't financial. It's going to be those things of nurturing and support. Granted, I can make it financial, but for me as a wife, that's not my priority. And I know other people have, whether they're in a marriage already or they feel like they want to be a boss chick married to whomever. There's all types of ways that these top shelf behaviors manifest themselves. And I think you can be that in any type of situation, as long as you're open to the possibilities.
So successful dating, you would think, is more about exploration and knowing who you are and what you want.
Who you are, what you want, what you bring.
Mm-hmm.
I think we focused a lot on what I want. I want this, I want that. But you also have to understand what you're bringing.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's, as much as people don't want it to seem transactional, it's transactional, and I want somebody who values what I bring. If I bring 10 things and you don't see any of them as valuable, have I brought you anything?
Right.
You
Well,
know.
Tell us how we can purchase your book or books as well.
Okay. You can purchase through Amazon. I have they're published through Family Pathways Books. So if you look on Amazon, this is what the cover looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's a workbook. So there's reading and there's tasks. Because if you're trying to grow, you have to experience things. In most of our careers, we take the time to experience our internships. We experience our careers that way. And that's how we kind of figure that we're on the right path. The same thing is relationships. And so you can follow me on Instagram. There's familypathway.books there, Facebook, but Amazon is where the book purchasing happens.
Well, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining us here on the Roundtable Consult and sharing your insights on being a top and becoming a top shelf wife. Well, I know we only scratched the surface of what's inside the book today. So I encourage all of our viewers to go out and purchase the book, read the book, learn from the book, learn about yourself, and always join us here on the Roundtable Consult. Each week we're here every Saturday, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Facebook Live. You can also catch us on our YouTube channel as well, on your favorite podcast listening platform. And you can also catch a repeat episode on the Star Radio. Again, as always, we appreciate you for tuning in to the Roundtable Consult. Until next week, be blessed.
Project. All right, so let's see. Just try holding down the Alt or Option key, and then you can split across all of the lanes. So say if I'm here, and again, I'll just start with no edits.